It's an iconic native animal often talked about but rarely seen.
Dingoes are very wary of humans, aloof, independent, but curious and intelligent. Very elusive, yeah.
This footage, commissioned by the Dingo Foundation, gives a glimpse of the species in the wild.
How can we get the public to feel any compassion or empathy for this beautiful, unique population of dingoes when they can't see them?
These dingoes in the Big Desert, on the border of Victoria and South Australia, are on the brink of extinction. Genetic testing shows they are pure dingoes, with dangerous levels of inbreeding, and the Victorian government says there are as few as 40 left. Yet until a few months ago, it was legal to kill them to protect livestock.
To know that we have this special population on the brink of extinction that have been driven to the brink of extinction by our actions as humans is heartbreaking.
In March, the state government banned the killing of dingoes in the Big Desert region. The Agriculture and Environment Ministers declined 730's request for an interview about that decision, but said it was made to save the pack from extinction. It's the first time the species has been protected across both public land and private property in Australia.
To say we were elated was an understatement. We're crying into our champagne and dancing around the lounge rooms.
But in rural Victorian towns, built on the back of sheep farming, the reception has been very different. Alan Bennett's property borders the Big Desert.
Kangaroos and emus impact the fences and then the dogs come through the fences.
Just before the law changed, Alan's daughter found 5 dead sheep in a paddock.
These are photos of some of the wounds when the sheep came in.
So it's not a quick death for the...
No, they just basically get eaten alive.
Since the time of filming, the attacks have continued. 730 has seen images of 13 dead sheep, including 1 lamb. Alan estimates the total loss is closer to 50 animals in 3 months.
The wild dogs are what do it. We know that. We see their tracks on them coming out of the park.
Alan applied for a permit to kill the predator, as required under the new law. The State Environment Department rejected the request, claiming the removal of even 1 dingo could threaten the population's survival.
The state government haven't moved the goalpost, they just ripped the goalpost off the oval.
The state government has allocated about $500,000 to help farmers find other ways to protect their sheep, such as building exclusion fences like this one, which is taller and stronger than regular fences. The problem is this stuff is expensive, and Alan reckons it'd cost about $500,000 just to fence his property.
If the state government wants to protect the wild, I'll still keep calling them wild dogs. If the state government wants to protect the wild dogs in the Big Desert, that's fine with me too. But we shouldn't be asked to bear the full cost of that decision, unassisted, unaided, unsupported.
Two years ago, 730 obtained covert footage from a wildlife protection group exposing the confronting reality of dingo trapping in Victoria. Outside of the Big Desert, trapping, shooting and poison baiting remains legal on or near farmland in Victoria. Similar control programs operate to varying degrees across Australia.
So we've got your bank details on file? Yep.
But controversially, in some states, there are different laws for dingoes, classed as protected native wildlife in national parks, and wild dogs, which are considered invasive pests.
And so there's that wiggle room where dingoes might be protected in, face value, but wild dog control is killing them.
It was widely believed that after colonisation, dingoes began breeding with domestic dogs, creating new hybrids called wild dogs. But a landmark study last year upended that theory.
The genetic evidence suggests that largely dingoes and dogs don't reproduce together.
Conservation geneticist Kylie Cairns tested the DNA of around 300 wild animals from across Australia to analyse dingo dog ancestry. The study was partly funded by the Dingo Foundation.
Previous studies across Australia used a testing method that was developed in the 1990s, and it looked at 23 DNA markers, compared to my method, which looks at 195,000.
Nationally, 85% of the animals tested were pure dingoes, with no or very little dog ancestry. In Victoria, 9 out of 10 animals had no dog ancestry at all.
It's really brought to the forefront the fact that the animal that we're killing with lethal control is a native animal, and they should be managed as a native animal across all states in Australia.
We now have protection for our sharks in the ocean, our crocodiles in our estuaries, our eagles in the sky, and not for our dingoes on the land.
The findings have prompted the Victorian government to review its lethal control programs, with a decision due in October. The Australian Capital Territory is also updating its policies to manage dingoes as a native species rather than a pest, though it will still allow lethal control in some areas.
We're not trying to eradicate dingoes or wild dogs from the continent. We're just trying to manage their numbers and populations so that there's less to cause problems.
Greg Mifsud coordinates the National Wild Dog Action Plan.
From a management perspective, they both cause impacts. It really doesn't matter whether it's a dingo or a wild dog.
Dingoes are known by many names across Australia. Wangari, Wilka, Warrigal, Gunnybutter. The dingo is deeply sacred to First Nations people. They are family.
Across Australia, there are growing calls to rethink how we manage dingoes, and some of the loudest voices are traditional owners. Last year, 20 First Nations groups signed this declaration.
We do not and have never approved the killing of dingoes. We demand an immediate stop to this management across Australia. I believe that we have never been included in the decision-making processes with dingo management in this country, and that is why I want to be sitting at the table.
Dingo advocate Sonia Takau is part of a new advisory body helping farmers find different ways to protect their livestock.
I can see the momentum growing. It's not going to happen overnight. Hey! How are you?
Today she's meeting the owners of Budgerballa Station in far north Queensland's cattle country in the shadow of Dingo Mountain.
They were more of a protection to us, and they really safeguarded us, you know, out here on country, yeah.
Small steps and patience.
That's it.
I knew they was always part of our Indigenous heritage growing up, but when we are in places like this, we always seen there was like a threat really to the cattle.
Traditional owner Joshua Henry has cultural ties to the dingo, but for decades the grazier has killed them as required by Queensland law.
I'm not going to lie, you know, we used to wait heavily to kill the dingoes.
4 years ago, a conversation with Sonia, his auntie, started to change his perspective.
We have to protect them. I never ever thought I'd say that, but it's something we have to do as Indigenous people. We have to figure out how we can do it.
One option is training guardian animals like donkeys, Maremma dogs or alpacas to guard the cattle.
One lady down in Mackay got donkeys. She reckoned she had no predation.
Yeah?
And I think that'd be good for here, you know.
Non-lethal control tools are very specific and work really well in some situations and have limited capacity in others.
Greg Mifsud says a blanket ban on lethal control is not feasible.
I'm happy to work in areas where there's an attitude to not do lethal control, but I don't think it's realistically nationwide a possibility.
Queensland has no plans to change its policy, and it remains to be seen how the station's new approach will be received. But its owners are determined.
I think it's important because it's bringing back the way of life, how it used to be before colonisation.
The wheels of change might be slowly turning, but much of the country remains deeply divided over whether dingoes are precious wildlife or a pest to be controlled.
Farming's all about finding solutions to problems. And yet I reckon this one with the wild dogs is probably one of the hardest things I reckon I've had to try and deal with in my farming career.
I couldn't imagine what farmers are feeling. Let's get behind them, support them, and the government fund them to trial these non-lethal alternatives. If this works, then it means it'll roll out across Australia. It has to.